Hey everyone, so today I'm in the C6 Corvette here, and I thought to make a video on basically around how to drive a stick, because I've always been a car guy, but I went into buying this car last year, not knowing how to drive a stick. On the test drive, I stalled the car a couple times, didn't really know what I was doing. I watched a couple YouTube videos, kind of learned what I could online, but didn't know what I was doing until I bought the car, and I love it now. I've put 1,000 miles on the car. I thought to drop a couple of things just in a video here to help other people in a similar situation trying to drive stick for the first time. So first things first, this is at the end of the day a Corvette. It's got a big V8 engine. So I am pretty confident this car, being like the only manual car I've ever driven, is a lot harder to stall than other manuals. It's got a big, beefy, torquey engine compared to a four-cylinder Honda, Toyota, whatever, that's economical. So keep that in mind. Basically, there's not much that's different than a normal car. You have your gas, you have your brake, and you have your clutch. Now, instead of just pressing the gas and the car doing all the magic for you and changing gears, you have to do that manually. So typically on the shifter, you have a little diagram here of where each gear is. So the car's not on right now, but third, first, second. In this case, my reverse is all the way to the right and up. But you might have a collar you have to lift, or reverse might be down here. It could be, all kinds of different things. Whenever you move this shifter, for the most part, left and right, we can wiggle it, we're in neutral. Whenever you move this into a gear or out of a gear, you're going to want to have the clutch pedal down. So anytime you move this shifter, for the most part, this clutch needs to be down. So when you are from a stop, need to start driving, clutch pedal goes down, put it in first gear, you let off the clutch, and you're going to start giving it gas. Now, this is where I want to dive into some more detail, because I was really unclear when I was learning how to drive how this balance works. And this seems to be where most people have trouble, is initially taking off from a dead stop in first gear. So you're going to be stopped, clutch pedal in, put it in first gear, slowly let off the clutch. Now, you can see on camera here, I'm slowly letting off the clutch. Let me tell you what, when you watch these YouTube videos and people say slowly let off the clutch, the first time you drive a manual, you're going to let off the clutch. What you feel like is very slowly, but it's not slow enough, most likely. So you will get a feel for it. You're going to slowly lift off of the clutch, and you will eventually find a bite point. So you'll lift off the clutch, and at some point, probably towards the top end here, you'll feel the car start to move, and you'll hear the engine RPMs start to dig closer down to zero. And when that happens, you're going to give it gas. So you're going to slowly lift off the clutch, and once you hear the engine start to struggle and the RPMs go down, the car starts to move, you press the gas, and you keep letting off. So the let off of the clutch is one motion. When I started driving, I thought that the idea was to let off as quickly as possible. I mean, I thought it was quick, but it's okay to take several seconds on the clutch. So it would be totally okay if you watch the length here for me to go into first, to lift off the clutch, add some gas, for that whole process to take as long as it just did. 3 seconds. It's totally fine. You don't have to rush it. Now, just like a bicycle, first gear, you're going to be accelerating, and these RPMs are going to go way, way up. And you might be at 6,000 RPMs on the engine, but only going like 30 miles an hour or whatever your gear ratio is. So this is where we need to put the clutch in and shift into second. And this will lower the RPMs, but allow us to increase the RPMs again, gives us, higher speed. So just like a bicycle, really. If you're on a bicycle if you're going, 20 miles an hour, which that's really quick for a bike, and you shift all the way down to first gear, you're not going to be able to keep up with the bike. You can't pedal fast enough to go 20 miles an hour. And that's kind of the same thing with these cars. If you're in first gear, if you're going 60 miles an hour or 70 miles an hour or whatever, that's just like way too quick for first gear. So kind of the same thing. I think that's a great analogy. Another thing that helps, most owner's manuals will have a diagram that kind of shows you a chart of what speed you should shift into each gear. In my case, I don't need this anymore, but when I first started driving, in the manual, it's labeled as best fuel economy. But this can also be a guide for when to shift. So when I hit 15 miles an hour, I shift into second. When I shift into 25 miles, or when I hit 25 miles an hour, I'll shift into third gear. So top is the gears, the bottom is the speed. And this is more of a guide. If there is a slight incline and your engine RPMs are, 1,000, which is kind of low, you might want to downshift. You might want to, test to see if you hear the engine lugging or the car shake or whatever, you either need more throttle, or more often than not, you need to downshift into a higher gear. Or I guess lower gear, technically. Higher gear ratio, perhaps. Whenever you do downshift as well, similar to the bike analogy, if we're going from first gear to second gear, the engine RPMs are going to lower, and we're going to have to let that happen naturally. So whenever you shift gears from first to second, second to third, specifically upwards, first to second, second to third, third to fourth, you're going to want to lift off the gas. So if we're going from first, we're in first gear right now. Let's say we're in first, we're cruising along, it's time for second, lift off the gas, clutch, second, boom. Literally that simple. When you are downshifting though, if we're in third gear and we're ready to go into second gear, let's say we're cruising along, what I would do is I would actually lift off the gas, clutch in, go into second gear, and I'm going to blip the throttle, boop, and then let out the clutch. Now, why do we do that? Why do we blip the throttle? Well, the reason is because when we're in third gear, let's say our RPMs are 1,500. When we go into second gear, our RPMs are probably going to be 2,500 or 3,000 potentially. And if you don't give it that gas to match the engine RPMs with where they're going to be when you let out the clutch, you're going to feel a jolt in the car, because the engine is all of a sudden going to be forced to go from 1,500 RPMs to 2,500 RPMs, and you're going to feel it. It may not damage the car, but you're going to feel it. So to alleviate that issue, we go from third, put it in second, blip the throttle, and let go. And that will, increase the engine RPMs. And that way, when you lift off the clutch, you're already going to be at the RPMs that you need to be in. So that's probably a really horrible explanation, but definitely something that I would recommend. There's a lot of other things too that I want to cover. So approaching a stoplight or stop sign. Let's say we are in fifth gear, going 45 miles an hour, and there's a stoplight. Or a stop sign. Let's do both of these one at a time. A stop sign. With a stop sign, we're supposed to basically stop. So what I will do is, what I used to do, I just put the clutch in, and I just go like this, and brake the car with the brake pedal, and come to a stop. That is not a good idea, and the reason why is because it's technically unsafe to brake your car from 50 miles an hour down to 0 without being in gear. Let's say there's an oncoming car that's doing something weird, or there's a pedestrian you need to dodge, or whatever the heck the case is. It's a smart idea to always have the car in gear when possible, so that you can accelerate. You never know when you're going to have to do sudden accelerations, and many times in automatic cars we think nothing of it. You brake, and all of a sudden you just accelerate. But in manual cars, you can't do that when you have the clutch in or when you're in neutral. So what I do when I'm rolling up to a stoplight, I'm in fifth gear. I will let off the gas, let the car deaccelerate. When my RPMs get down to 1,000 or so, I will clutch in, blip the throttle, move it into fourth, let go of the clutch. and then I'll let my RPMs go back down to 1,000 or so, clutch in third gear, blip the throttle, let off the clutch. And then again, I'll let the RPMs come down. And typically I won't have to go into second or first gear. It's the best thing for the synchros and in the transmission to maybe not downshift every single time into second gear and first gear. And by the time you're in third gear, you downshift into third gear and let the RPMs climb down. You'll be going 10 or 15 miles an hour at that point, and you can just clutch in, put this in neutral, and brake to your final stop. At a red light, you want to avoid holding the clutch in for long periods of time. Same process as a stop sign, but you don't want to just sit there at a red light, in first gear, holding down the clutch. That's not ideal. And the reason why is because you're going to be wearing out the throwout bearing. And the throwout bearing can make noise, it can cause other damage. You really don't want to do that. It's a very expensive thing to replace. So my rule of thumb, if you have to hold down the clutch pedal for more than 10 to 15 seconds, just pop it out of gear, let go of the clutch, and hold the brake, or maybe use the handbrake if you're on a hill. If you're at a stop sign, you can coast at 10 miles an hour or whatever to a stop while holding down the clutch, no problem. Once you're at that stop sign, you're only going to be holding in that clutch for 5 seconds, and then you're going to start to go again from the stop sign. So just a couple of tips there. Hill starts are always a problem, unfortunately. It just seems that there's really no easy way to learn them. My advice, of course, with getting any manual car, take it to a parking lot. Get used to it. You can actually, from a stop, put most cars in first gear and slowly let off the clutch without any gas at all. And that's a good way to get a feel for the clutch, feel for the bite point, all that stuff. You don't do that every single time, because without any gas, without accelerating when letting off the clutch from a dead stop, you are very slow. And, it's just not a fast process. So that's why we like to typically, from the get-go, use some gas. The more gas you use, the quicker you will launch, essentially. And just for kind of a reference, when you're at a dead stop and accelerating, so let's say, we're at a dead stop, we put it in first gear, we let off the clutch, engine RPMs, anywhere between 1,000 and 1,500 is a good target, I would say, for most cars. So, yeah. What else is there to chat about? Oh, the parking brake. So this, I don't know if you should call this the emergency brake or the parking brake, whatever. I'm going to use them interchangeably probably here. This thing is useful. Some people will use these on hill starts. So when you're on an incline and you push the clutch in, the car's going to roll back until you put it in first gear and you accelerate. So some people use this handbrake on hills to assist with, as you engage the handbrake, and as you're letting the clutch out in first gear, you disengage the handbrake, and that way you don't slide back on the hill into the car behind you. But you really just got to get a feel for it. Do what's best for you, what works for you. Ultimately, I only use the handbrake personally for parking. And most owner's manuals will recommend that you have the handbrake on and you put the transmission into either first gear or sometimes reverse. And the idea behind this is when the car is off, if you're on a hill, let's say the handbrake were to fail, because at the end of the day, it's probably just a linkage going to the rear brakes. If this were to fail, you still have the transmission in gear. And with the engine off, the only way for the car to move, assuming this fails, is if the car is heavy enough, or if it can turn over all the stuff in the powertrain, including the engine. And, the engine is going to take quite a bit of oomph to turn over. It's really not possible. But you don't just want to park the car in gear. You want to make sure you always use the handbrake. It's probably not best to have the mechanical stress on the powertrain. You really want all that stress to be on the handbrake, but not a bad idea to put the car in gear as well. So yeah, other than that, I think that's it.